we use that term, a man or woman of faith. Which is true, it applies, right? There's faith there. But I've found a few other just type of people, type of kind of worldviews. But this one I'm talking just kind of as the spiritualist. And by that I'm speaking very generally, just someone who believes in something greater than themselves out there, right? There's something more out there, be that fate, the universe, karma, kind of a Buddhist way of looking at things, the force be with you, right? There's something bigger out there. So if your faith, there's something more than just the material that's there. That is a faith that people have. Pantheist is just the idea that God is in everything. God is in this table, He's in the building, He is in the trees, He is in everything. When you go a little New Age with it, you can say God is, I am God. Just want to make this disclaimer tonight. If I am God, then you all have many problems. You're in trouble. Right? I do not believe that. I am not, and I'm far from it, right? But again, it's a faith that people have. People believe these things. How about this last one? Atheist or agnostic? I think, well, that's not faith. But again, we're talking about things that you can't see and touch, but that you believe. And there's faith there. Because as an atheist, there's things you need to believe about the universe coming from nothing. Right? How the universe came to be. How life came to be. Right? These are things that we can't see, we can't touch. You can't get in your way back machine, right? Go in the time machine and go find it. Right? It is things that you have to just have faith. Now, there might be evidence or might not be evidence towards that type of thing, but you can't see it and touch it. Right? It is a faith matter. So there is no person, there's no one who does not have faith in this. So the question then is, what best explains reality? What is your faith in? So that's some of what we're going to be talking about tonight and the next 3 Monday nights after this. Right? We're looking at the historical evidence, right? Looking at some of the logical, the philosophical reasoning behind things. Observation, just the things that we can see in our world, the things we can touch. And even some archaeological evidence, and things that point to just the evidences to these things we will talk about tonight. Is there a God? And in the future weeks, right? What can we see Him in this person of Jesus? Do we know this person Jesus existed? How do we know the resurrection happened? How do we know that the Bible is what Christians claim to be? Is it that? And then a big question that people many ask is, if God is good, why evil? Why is there evil in the world? And so those things, but we'll look at the evidences, the reasoning behind it. And so it's not just this idea of a blind faith. And it is what do you have, what reason do you have to believe? And one of the things we want to do is we want to see if our beliefs are consistent. If the whole structure will hold together. And I want to give you an example of what I mean by that. How sometimes something's not consistent. Maybe you've heard, or maybe you've said yourself at some point, something to the extent of karma, we'll get back at them, or the universe brought us together, or fate brought us together, right? These ideas of fates, karma, the universe. So karma, a lot of times, usually if I hear it, it's used in the connotation of something bad. Like you did something bad and karma's going to get you back. It's going to kind of balance the scales, so to speak, right? Or with the universe, like bringing us together. Right? It's the idea that somehow, right, there was a fate that brought you two together, brought this relationship together. Well, usually when people make this claim, when they will say it's the universe, it's fate, it's karma, it's because they would say that there is not a personal God out there, right? Because if they thought there was a personal God, they would say, God brought us together, or, God will see to the justice of things, right? But they say fate, they say universe, because so there's not a personal God, they would say. I don't think there's a personal God. I want to stop, but I want to think then about the consistency of that statement. So when you say karma, is going to get back at someone, or the universe brought us together, What are you saying? Well, you're saying several things. You're saying this karma, fate, the universe, one is all-knowing. Somehow it knows, like, right? It knows what this person did, and it knows that it has to balance the scales of justice and get back at them, karma, right? Or if we're talking relationship, it knows, this person here, right? It knows you, and it knows you, and it knows that it needs to bring you two together, right? So we're talking about something that would be all-knowing. Well, then we're talking about something that is caring, that is personal, right? Because not only must this force, karma, fate, know what's going on, it's got to care what's going on. It's got to care that it needs to bring these people together, or care that it's got to balance the scales of justice. Right? So we know that. Okay, so it's all-knowing, and it's personal. And then beyond that, it has to be all-powerful. Because it not only has to know and care, it has to be able to do something about it. That's to say, well, I see these people, I want to bring them together. Or I see this injustice, I'm going to balance the scales of justice. So we just described something that is all-knowing, all-powerful, personal, and caring, which is the very definition of the Christian God. Right? But it's the very thing that a person says, well, I don't believe in a personal God. So do you see the inconsistency? I think what happens is it's more just the person doesn't like the idea of a personal God. They don't like that idea that there could be a God that they have to answer to. And so it's easier to just go with this idea of karma or the universe. But yet they don't recognize the inconsistencies of this. Right? That the evidence just does not hold to this. So that's why we want to look at what do we believe, and does it all hold together? Which is why then with these 4 weeks, we kind of built it as this kind of structure. Right? Because to talk about why God would allow evil is an irrelevant question if there is no God. To talk about who Jesus is just talking about a random guy from history if there is no God. So right, is building the structure. What are all the evidences that we have to know there is a God? And then we go from there. Right, into the next 3 weeks here, things we'll be talking about. And there's just a few notes I want to make on relevancy tonight and the following weeks here. First note is we're talking about probability. Right? We're talking about probable answers as an ultimately a cumulative case. So here's what I'm saying, like, kind of that you can't go see and touch it, right? You can't go produce a picture. You're saying, I can't give you a picture of God. But when there's the evidences, we're looking at probable, and what is the probable cause for these things that we'll look at some tonight? Probable answers. In the end, you make this cumulative case. In other words, you get so many things together and it begins to really show a complete picture. Here's an example. Think of a crime scene. Right, so imagine we've got a crime. Imagine we've got a murder that had happened. Right, so the murder had happened, and we think it's Mary Lou. I mean, she, now she's looking pretty suspicious. She might be our murderer. So we're not sure, but we've got just DNA. We've got Mary Lou's DNA at the house where this murder victim was. Well, that says something, but there could be many reasons, right? Mary Lou might have visited this person a few days beforehand, and her DNA is there. It had nothing to do with the murder. So the DNA alone wouldn't have, would not be anywhere near enough. There's many reasons. What if just her fingerprints, even if it's her fingerprints on the murder weapon found several blocks away? Well, somebody stole her knife out of her kitchen, and that's, it was her knife, that's why it had her fingerprints. Right? They'd stole it, right? There's other reasons, if that's all that you have. Motive. We all knew Mary Lou really didn't like this person. Right? Well, we all have somebody maybe we don't get along with. It doesn't mean we're going to murder them, so that alone doesn't make it. Even an eyewitness. Right? Even if somebody could say, I saw Mary Lou at the victim's house about the time of the murder. Again, if that's all we have, right? Maybe Mary Lou's just delivering a pizza. Right? That's all you have. There's other reasons. But if you have DNA at the crime scene, you have her fingerprints on the murder weapon, you have a clear motive why, and then you have eyewitness who puts her there. Well, all four of those together suddenly seems to paint a pretty clear picture of the nefarious Mary Lou here getting around. So sorry, Mary Lou, I just had to pick on you for that. But. Right, so it's kind of having a fun, a light example of how the cumulative case. We do this. This is how law works a lot of times. You're building all these different evidences to show, to make a cumulative case of how this comes together. And that's many things of what we'll be talking about tonight and in the following weeks. It's how it all kind of comes together, pointing to one particular thing. So it's kind of like multiple sectors of evidence for a cumulative case. So when we're talking about evidences for God, right, and this is just kind of blowing through here quick, right? There's cosmology, there's mathematics, there's philosophy, there's physics, there's ethics, there's aesthetics, there's religious experience, right? There's all these different avenues that people speak on as proofs for God. And we're not going to speak in all of these tonight. I'm just going to give you an idea of how this makes this cumulative case, this multiple sectors of evidence for this cumulative case. There's one other note I want to make, and that's again relevant to tonight and every one of these sessions. And that is the question of God's existence, and some of the other questions we'll look at in the future weeks, is not simply intellectual. It is rather a deeply spiritual one, and it involves your emotions. And it is spiritual. So there's people who you could give them all the evidence in the world, and their hang up, their problem with God, it maybe isn't an intellectual one. Maybe it's they've lost people in their life and they want nothing to do with God. And maybe it's other things that they have going on. Right? There's things that could be going on where this is more than intellectual. So for all of us, then my question is can you examine yourself and what if you don't fully believe in things, and what maybe is keeping you from some of these thoughts? Is there's that kind of emotional thing as we go through some of the evidences here? And I kind of want to give one example of how people do this at large. This might be another one you're familiar with. Have you ever heard anybody say, "That's not a God I could worship"? Right? I would never worship a God like that. Well, the statement is, I think, kind of has a problem. Let me give you an example. Here's a picture of three women. This is in Nazi Germany. Right, they have some Nazi leaders going by. So you're seeing the Heil Hitler salute there. And you can see the woman, on the left, or I guess, yes, on the left, happy. Seems like she's very excited about what's going on. Woman in the middle is kind of hard to tell what she's maybe thinking. The woman on the right is not happy about the situation. Right? Not happy that Hitler, that the Nazi party is in charge. But notice that all three of them are giving the Heil Hitler salute. What's my point? Point is that even as much as this woman does not want it, the reality is at that point, the Nazi party was the ruling party. That was the ruling party. So they had to deal with that. And as much as she might not have wanted it, she knows if I don't salute, right, I'm at risk, I'm under suspicion, I could be arrested, I could be killed, my family could be at risk. So she salutes, even though it's not a thing she's happy about. How does this apply to God? Well, to be clear, I don't think God is at all a ruthless dictator. And he's not. We'll talk about that as we go forward. Don't believe that one bit. But just for the sake of argument for a moment, let's say that he is. Let's say that the real God is a ruthless, brutal dictator. That's the reality of it. Well then, this doesn't help us. Right? We might not like it. We might not like that that's what God is. But that's the reality of it. So that's the reality we have to deal with. And what does it mean that there's a God that I'm going to have to answer to as this brutal, ruthless dictator? And what does that mean? Right? That's a reality. Just like this woman is dealing, I don't like it, but I'm dealing with that reality. So what I'm getting at is when people say, that's not a God I would worship, I don't think they're really saying that. I think what they're really saying is, I don't want to know who the real God is. Because I don't want to answer to that God. Because if I know who the real God is, then I have to contend with that. That has an impact on my life. So I'd rather say I just don't want to worship a God like that. And that kind of is my excuse. It's my out. It's how I get out of it. But we don't do that with anything else in life, right? We have to deal with the reality of things. Again, I want to be clear to this. I think God is an incredible God of love and grace. Right? But this is just an example of how we deal with the reality. If he wasn't, you still deal with that reality. No one would take this out of it. That's just not a God I would worship. To me, is an excuse, right? A lot of times it's an emotional thing. I just don't like it. It's not what I like, not what I want. I'm not going there. So it's kind of an example of how sometimes it's more than an intellectual question. Right? Sometimes there's more going on than just pure intellect. And those things for all of you, I don't know where you all stand, what you know, but it's things we all have to battle in terms of how our emotions can get involved and maybe skew what we are thinking and seeing. One other final thing before we dive into these few arguments on the existence of God. Just a quick disclaimer. And who doesn't want a disclaimer before you dive into the meat of things? And that is, this particular topic, right, the existence of God, is more unique, or it's unique compared to the other topics we'll be talking in future weeks. Right? Because with this one, you have to talk more on philosophical arguments, some scientific data, some moral arguments that are a little bit more, a little bit more conceptual in nature. When you're dealing with scientific stuff, you deal with numbers and so on. And I've tried really hard to just give the basics of some of these arguments and not have you just glass over with a whole bunch of scientific numbers and data. Try to avoid that, to give just enough to see what some of these things are. But it's kind of to make you aware that that's kind of what the argument is when you're talking about the existence of God. But hang in there, and if you're feeling a little overloaded tonight, in the next few weeks, definitely will have a different feels. It's different things you're looking at. You start looking to historical arguments and some of the historicity of Jesus' life in the Bible and so on. It's a very different type of conversation. So with that, we'll look at a few of these things on the existence of God. All right? It's kind of a long intro, but I want to kind of set the stage. So, are we ready? There we go. Trust my wife to help me out there. So the existence of God. I mentioned there's many arguments. There's three that we're going to look at in particular. But there's just a few here. I'm just gonna brush by quick because I just want you to get an idea, and it's kind of what my whiteboard is here. So this cumulative thing we're talking about is the ontological argument, which is it's an argument that I have a hard time getting my head around, dealing with the necessity of a God. I don't really want to bring it up because if you start looking into these arguments for God, this is one you will commonly see. So I wanted to bring it up more for that. Right? So it's an argument on God's necessity, and the whole point is right that it points to God. God is the necessity of a God to do all this. Right? So this would be the answer. There's the religious experience argument. The religious experience argument is that you look at people throughout history, right? Throughout cultures, all around the world, throughout history. General people, by and large, right, believe in some God, some greater power, right? There's this religious practices, religious experience. So some of the argument is, where does that come from? Where would we get this? Right now, as a Christian, I would say that's by our Creator. Right? These are things that have been put into us to know that our Creator is a relational Creator, to know that He is there, right, and to turn to Him. Right, but otherwise you have to have other reasons for why this religious experience seems to be the case for all these people throughout history. It doesn't seem to be a thing that like a blind evolutionary process would ever lead to. And so there's other things you have to come up with. But an easy answer, if there is a Creator, right, it would be that God would be a clear answer on that. The next one is the transcendental argument. Just the idea of physics, logic, right? These laws that govern the world, right? These laws that are logical, right? Mathematics, things that govern the world. It is, where would they come from, right? These things are clearly our intelligence, right? And you need intelligence for these things. And where would such a thing come from if there is no God? It's going to be a product of a mind of intelligence. And of course, if we see a product of intelligence, right, then we would look for something that is super intelligent to give us these laws of logic, of physics, and mathematical laws, and so on, that point to this thing. But it's one that points to God. Without God, you have to get creative on where these things would come from. Consciousness is simply the idea that we are not only just conscious beings, aware of it, but in us, right? There's if I ask you right now to close your eyes and picture a beach and picture the water and give you all these things, right? And you will get this vision in your head. Well, where are you, right? That beach isn't really there. It's not a physical place. You're not at it. And that beach isn't actually physically in your brain right now, right? It's a thing with your soul, your consciousness, right? Your mind, right? Which points to the fact that we are spiritual beings. Again, that points to something greater than ourselves, something out there that is not just purely evolved from matter kind of thing, right? There's more out there. Well, that would point to a creator, a God. And the last one I'll just mention quickly was the aesthetic experience, which is the idea of beauty. Kind of similar to the religious experience. That we all have the same general ideas of things that are beautiful and to be in awe, right? I think there's reasons, there's places that so many people travel to see, to experience that they see as beautiful. Now there's some subjectivity, right? You might think the Mona Lisa painting is beautiful, and I happen to think it's really ugly, right? There's some subjectivity there, but I'm talking in general, right? There's things that we all recognize as beautiful. And as an example, you can go and buy a calendar, and in the calendar you're going to go and hang on your wall. It's going to have pictures of mountains, it's going to have pictures of the beach, of the seashore, of a sunset, a sunrise. Might even have pictures of little kitties or dogs or little puppies, right? But what you're not going to be able to do is you're not going to go find a calendar that is a picture of a landfill and dead animals. Right? Those are things that are ugly. Right? We all have this general understanding of beauty. Again, it's hard to understand that. It's just a biological process of evolution with no God. So it points to a creator, right, who would create us. Right? He has created the beautiful things. He has created these things that we see as wonderful and beautiful. And we just then have that sense of awe, all of us do in it. Right? So it's an argument that, again, can be answered with the fact of there being a God. Without that, you have to get creative on how else we might have this kind of commonality. So, that was just a kind of rush, not to fully overload, but I want to kind of paint a picture. You can see how there's multiple arguments. You either need to come up with different answers, or there's one central answer that seems to answer this question. And then the three here we'll look a little bit closer at. First is the cosmological argument. Don't be intimidated by the complex terms. I just want to give you the official term, what it is. But what it means is that we began. So the argument that we had a beginning. The universe, right, had a beginning, which is significant, and I will get there. There's the teleological argument, which in the fancy term, it's the fancy term for the argument, but it means that we were designed. There's a design in us. We were designed for something. Right? We have a purpose. Right? And when people or things are designed, right, that means there's a designer. And then the last is the moral argument, which is the idea that we know good from evil. That we in general, have this sense of good from evil. So those are the three we'll look just a little closer at. So the first is the cosmological argument. As we began. And it looks like this, if you're going to put it just kind of in a logical formula. First premise, what began to exist has a cause. That makes sense? If it began to exist, if this table at some point began to exist, it has a cause. Somebody made this table. Second premise, the universe began to exist. Which leads to the third premise, therefore the universe has a cause. We'll talk about why this is significant when we're talking about the existence of God. First premise, let's look at this. The universe began to exist. We began to exist. And so, what began to exist has a cause. Let's just say, excuse me, the first premise. What began to exist has a cause. So maybe it's easier to see it like this. Something never comes from nothing. Something never comes from nothing. You know what I know that none of you are worried about, never have been worried about? For those of you who have kids, grandkids, I know you've never been worried about, you're just sitting in your living room, and all of a sudden out of nothing is going to appear a lion underneath your child or grandchild, and now what do you do? And out of nowhere there was a lion. And you don't worry about that. Why? Because something never comes from nothing. There's never just going to be a lion that randomly appears in your house. Or, that pizza you wish you could have, right? It's just not going to pop up for you as much as you want it. Right? It never comes from nothing. It has a cause. If that lion is there in your living room, you're going to assume either somebody, like a lion broke out of the zoo or got away somehow and made entrance into your house, or somebody really doesn't like you and has a creative way of trying to take you out, apparently. That's what you're going to assume. That's why the line is there. It didn't come from nothing. We don't ever think like this, right? Never. We get this. I know I'm saying this, and it's well, duh, right? We understand this. But yet, to say if there's no God, that's what you're ultimately saying. It has come from nothing. There was nothing, and poof, there was something. So then the universe began to exist. That's the second premise. And again, this seems like obvious, but you don't have to go far back. And there's still some people who claim that it is eternal, but you don't have to go far back to find many authorities, scientists, and so on claiming that it's the universe that is eternal. The universe was static. The universe has always been. When I say you don't have to go far back, in the 1900s, and one of the primary ones that you might have heard, a little-known name of Albert Einstein. Right? Albert Einstein first had this, you've heard of the theory of relativity, and he began to realize that meant with the force of gravity, it would pull the universe back into like a tight ball or of nothing, where light couldn't even get out. So he realized, well, that not only points to a beginning, and he didn't like that, but there has to be some other opposing force or something, because that doesn't seem to be the case, and he really wanted the universe to be static, to be the eternal thing, right? Because if you could say the universe is just the thing that always was, well, then you don't need a God for it. Where'd it come from? It always has been. It's been the universe. So this was Einstein's big thing. And so he created this kind of philosophy around his mathematical formulas around it. But the fact that he knew that the universe otherwise would have been by gravity, would have been pulled in, right, into a singular nothing, where nothing, no light, no rules can exist. Right? He knew that was a law. It was actually later even confirmed by Stephen Hawking being one of the big names that you probably heard of. Right? So knowing that the universe would go back, right, if you were to reverse time. Well, for Einstein, well, he later called it his biggest mistake of his life. It's his words. It was when they had the Hubble telescope, and they could prove that the universe was expanding, that the galaxies were moving away from each other. Well, that did everything. It changed everything for Einstein. He didn't like it. It changed everything. It actually took him a while to admit to it. Because if it's expanding, right, then it's not static. And if you're to imagine, as we go forward in time, the universe is expanding. Well, if this was like, for everybody who's old enough to remember a VHS tape, and you were to hit rewind, and you could watch everything going backwards, right? If you were watching the universe expanding, you could hit rewind, you could watch it shrink, and if you were to be able to rewind it all the way to the beginning, you're going to get to where it's a ball of nothing, right? Or that means the universe is not eternal. It's not static. So Einstein did not like that at all, but he had no choice but to change. So that is a significant thing, right? This is what they want. This is what many scientists wanted. They really wanted a static universe. But that is just clearly not the case. Because the universe began to exist. Well, the reason they didn't want that is because when you know the universe began to exist, then you get to this third part of the premise. If the universe is expanding, right, that means the universe had a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, then therefore the universe has a cause. Back to that first part, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Something never comes from nothing. Right? So there must then be something outside of it. Outside of the created things, outside of the universe, outside of all the created material, the matter that we see. Outside of not just the matter, the material things, but outside of time, right? It's part of the creation. So time, there's the physical laws. So it means that there must exist an absolutely first, uncaused, beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe. Right? That's what you need, because you can't take from something that's within the creation and make that the creator. That's part of the creation. Right? You need something that's outside of it all. You need an uncaused cause. But that uncaused cause has to be supremely intelligent and supremely powerful. It has to be eternal. And to be there to bring all of this into existence. So it's kind of like that crime scene idea again, right? When you can't find the evidence inside the room, right? When it's not all there, you have to look outside of it. Well, we can't. What we see inside the room, being inside our created order, the universe, right? When the answer isn't there, when there's no such thing as an uncaused cause, you never see a line appear in your living room out of nothing. Right? You have to look outside of it. You have to look for things that are outside of this creation. That would be immaterial. That would be powerful. That would be eternal. That would be supremely intelligent. Right? So you look, and that means there is a creator. There must be. Knowing that the universe began. So that is just, in a nutshell, the cosmological argument. Right? And so let's just write that here. The cosmological, right? There'd be another one that says the universe began. Something had to start it. Every cause needs something that actually started it, something that caused it. We'll look at the other two, but I just want to pause for a minute, and I'll give you a ton of information. I'd say there's a little bit more today because of the longer intro. I just kind of want to walk into why we want to discuss some of these things, especially because, I mean, if you're a Christian, it's great to know these things just to, one, it helps just undergird our own faith. Of the evidence behind it. Two, you have no idea what conversations you'll be with and with other people. It's good to know. But questions, anything on any of this so far? Yes. I didn't hear you, Emily.
Okay, so you were saying here it says, I'm new to this, so
Oh, you're good.
fill me in as and why I think this way.
Okay.
And okay, if you're saying the universe began to exist, okay, why do we want to start a beginning? Why is it that they start with Adam and Eve and all that?
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to just make sure I understand the question. So you mean like if knowing there's a beginning, why is the beginning with Adam and Eve?
Yeah, like, do you have an insight on that?
I do, yes. And the things I want to give you a short answer now, but we'll talk far more on it when we look at one of the coming weeks here.
All right.
With you. But I want to give you a short answer on that right now. And that is, and some of the things that we've been talking about here, that God is, and these things are pointed, that God is relational. Right? That He's created us for relationship with Him. He's a relational being. So when He created Adam and Eve, when He has them in the garden, right, it is for relationship with Him.
Oh, okay.
Again, we'll delve further down that. I don't want to go there now because I'll take you go off, but we'll talk more on that actually on week 4, on the why God would allow evil. We'll talk far more on that idea of Adam and Eve and what that looks like. But it starts with that God is relationship, and that's just what we were created for, is relationship.
Okay, I thought different. Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? right, the second of the three, right, the teleological argument, which is the idea that we were designed. That there's a design in us, there's a design in the universe. So here's kind of another example. Imagine you were to get up in the morning and you were to come out of your room and you were to go to your kitchen table and you were to see there's alphabet cereal there. Do they still make alphabet cereal? I didn't know. There's alphabet cereal, right? And then somebody had grabbed some of the cereal pieces out and they spelled the words morning and breakfast and milk. Sitting there like that on your table. Well, then you leave your house and you go for a walk down the beach and you see there, scribbled in the sand on the beach is the word summer. Are you going to stop and you're going to have to pause and you're going to wonder and say, well, could that have been a person who did that? Or did the alphabet cereal somehow just tip over and it spilled out and it just somehow spelled those three words? And then like last night, when the surf came up, it must have moved some rocks and sticks around, and instead of just giving some weird dirt formation, it actually gave us the word summer. Right? You're going to question that. You're going to wonder, is that it, or maybe it was a person? Right? Again, it seems like it's a simple answer. Right? Obviously, no one in their right mind is going to see that and wonder if it just happened by chance, by randomness. Right? You understand that because of the order, right? These are words, they communicate something. It takes an intelligence to write that. If the alphabet cereal was just a hodgepodge of letters, well, then sure, somebody could just tipped it over. These are specific words that have meaning. Well, that takes an intelligence to put that there. So you're never going to assume it just happened by chance. You're going to assume somebody took that alphabet cereal and for whatever reason, spelled those words, and then someone was on the beach and was looking forward to summer and scribbled that in there. You see it, you recognize where intelligence is required. Seems easy enough. However, right, when people want to say like, well, if there is no God, right, then you run into some of this problem. You run into this problem when we see things at the universe, with the universe as a whole, speaking like the fine-tuning of the universe. And then when you talk about things with the human biology itself, and some of the specifics, I'll give just a couple examples, and I go way deep. Right, there's things there that are far, infinitely more complex than the word summer on the sand, or the word milk and breakfast on alphabet and cereal. Right, far more complex. So, let's look at a couple. But before we do, I want to do just a quick little mathematical probability thing. So I give one of you a quarter. Let's flip a quarter. What are the odds that you're going to get heads when you flip that quarter?
50-50.
50-50, 1 and 2, right? Exactly, 1 and 2. What if I give two of you a quarter, and you both have to flip once? What are the odds that both of you get a head? Do we have any teachers here that?
25%.
It goes, yeah, it increases. It becomes 1 in 4, right? It becomes an exponential number. So if we had 3 coins, and there's 3 of you, I give you 3 here a quarter, and you all have to flip it. 3 of you can flip it, and for 3 of you to come up with heads is a 1 in 8 chance. 4 of you would be a 1 in 16 chance. Okay, now just to jump, if there was 10 of you, doesn't seem like that many, right? There's 10 of you right here at this table, I give you all a quarter, you all have to flip it once. The odds that it would come up with all 10 of you getting heads is 1 in 1,024. Right? Something not likely. How about 20 of you? 20 of you give 20 of you quarters. Now, if you're all to flip it all at once, we want all of you to get heads. And I would have guessed, since I'm not a mathematician, I would have guessed, well, it's not likely, but it could happen. Well, it could, but your odds are 1 in 1,048,576. So how many of you want to flip 20 coins to see how long it takes us to get heads tonight? You want to stay for that? We might be here until August, but it'll happen eventually. Depends how fast you can flip your quarters, 1,048,576 times. Right, so it increases exponentially. And I want this as an example to kind of, you start to get in your mind just the odds of certain things, and that is simply flipping a quarter. Where there's there's only 2 places a quarter can go, right? Heads or tails. But even flipping something as simple as that, 20 coins, you already are down to a 1 in a 1 million chance of this occurring. So now let's look at a couple things that can fine-tuning of the universe. First, the force of gravity. Right? The force of gravity, which is, if the force of gravity is at all any stronger or any less, if it's any stronger, the universe would have shrunk, right? And it would have collapsed upon itself. No life. If it's any stronger, then it would have continued to expand too fast. No stars would form, no life. Right? So it has to be completely fine-tuned. Well, the odds that the force of gravity would be fine-tuned where it is, by chance, kind of like just flipping the quarters, is this. It is, you'd have to have a 1 to 10 to the 60th power chance. Now, if you don't know what that means, I'll give a better example for you. Without this, you have no life. It would look like this. You have 1 chance out of that, which is, I don't know, I'd have to figure out, it's like 100 million, trillion, 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 I think is what that is, something like that. That's the chance of the force of gravity being where it's set by chance. And again, this isn't, I didn't just figure this out over my Wheaties this morning. This are some brilliant mathematicians who've been able to come up with these numbers. We'll look at one other one, the expansion rate of the universe. Same thing, the universe was expanding faster than it is, right? No life. Any slower, no life. But for it to be exactly what it is by chance, it'd be 10 to 1/20th of the power. There's no life, which would look like this. So 1 chance in that for the expansion rate to happen by chance. Again, I don't know, I don't know, anybody want to give me that number? So now, just to really appreciate, what about those two together, right? Because they both have to be in sequence, together, the gravitational force and the expansion rate for there to be life. Well, the odds of that then happening by chance is the 10 to the 180th power. So you'd have to have 180 zeros, which I didn't try to do because you'd be going off the slides, right? So this one was 120 zeros. So maybe I could have gotten it on. You'd have another 60 zeros out of that, for both of them to happen together. Right? Already just odds that are impossible odds to happen by chance. That's just for 2. That's just for the gravitational force and for the expansion of the universe. Well, there's a minimum, scientists have said there's a minimum of 30 cosmological or physical parameters of the universe, that if you tweak, if you change it all, the tilt of the Earth, the speed at which the Earth spins on its axis, the distance of the sun to the Earth, there's over 30. But again, if you just tweak it, we're not talking you have to tweak a huge amount. If you tweak by just a fraction, no life. There's over 30 of them. Well, if with only 2 of them having to exist together, you already have to have 10 with 180 zeros off of it to happen by chance. How would you have all 30 happen together? By chance, randomness. And here for this, I actually just want to turn to a quote. This is, so Roger Penrose is a brilliant mathematician. He worked with Stephen Hawking on different, some of their different theorems and so on. And here's how he says it. If we combine all the laws that must be fine-tuned, we couldn't ever write down the number in full, since it would require more zeros than the number of elementary particles in the universe. Right, so that is as close as you can get as to the scientific mathematician saying there is a God because there's no other option. There's nothing else. Right, that kind of fine-tuning to have life, that's only intelligence. And only supreme intelligence, right? Because we're not talking about simple things. Then how about just quickly, we'll just mention one thing with the human body. Right? So we're going from the universe, going down to just you and I. So DNA, DNA, which is, is like the instruction manual we have in all of us, that is the manual for our development, our function, our growth. It's what tells, it's how we make the proteins that make our cells and so on. The DNA in us has, each strand of DNA contains 3 billion letters of information. 3 billion letters. It's not with an M, but with a B. 3 billion. And then to make it even more incredible, those letters must be in a specific sequence. All 3 billion of them. If those letters are not in a specific sequence, the DNA does not function as it's supposed to, and we don't have life. All 3 billion for our human DNA. So to give you just a very simple example, and here's, I guess I didn't count, and this might be like 20 objects, not 3 billion. Right? But they're just random. It might look complex, but it has no meaning. It does nothing for us. It communicates nothing. It does nothing for us. It's just randomness. No function. But when you put the letters in a certain form, right, then writing is a way to communicate. Only all those letters in a certain order communicate things.
Cool.
Well, this is just, with 20 letters. There's 3 billion in the DNA that has to be in a specific sequence in order for it to function, in order for it to order our cells, right? Order the proteins to be made, in order for those things to make our cells. Right? So that is the protein alone, or the DNA alone. So the odds of getting DNA sequenced randomly, the odds of getting 3 billion letters in an order that they have to be for us to live. Well, this one I know I could not have put on my screen or on anything. 1 in 10 to the 1,300,000 power. So you gotta add 1,300,000 zeros after that 10. In order for our DNA sequence, in order for that to be in the order it is, randomly. Right, again, at this point you've left, there's not enough time, right? For the people who want to back up, and the universe is, say, 1 trillion years old, right? There's not enough time for this stuff to happen by chance. It's an impossibility. And that's just speaking of our DNA, right? Our DNA then produces amino acids, which are complex, which then produces the protein chains, which have to be in specific orders, or they don't function, right? Also equally complex. We produce our cells, right? So I could give you the same kind of phenomenal numbers of like I did with the DNA, of the odds of them happening by chance, right? These same unbelievable numbers. And so not possible. Not at all, right? Chance and time cannot explain it. And so those now, and you start reading some of the scholarly journals and some of that with these types of things, I know you probably all do right before you go to bed and put yourself to sleep. But you can see, right, this is kind of now becoming more of an understanding. It is impossible to say that chance and time did this. Because that was kind of the thing. Like if, given a long enough time, something's eventually going to happen. It's random, it's chance, it will happen. Well, numbers like this aren't possible. You can't have something that is 1 chance to 1 and whatever that was, zillion, trillion, whatever, right? You can't have that. It would not happen. So they understand that chance and time just can't explain it. Again, because people in general don't like what it implies. Well, that seems to imply a creator. And what does that mean? Because I don't want a creator I need to answer to. So you've got a couple alternatives that have been put out there, and again, by supremely intelligent people, right? This is the technical term, panspermia, which is the idea that life was brought here by, either aliens, or it came on, it was on comets, asteroids, and it crashed into the earth, and life came from that, right? Because that's the idea, like we recognize it can't happen by chance. Life cannot happen, so something intelligent had to have brought it. It must have been aliens, right, that did it. The other one, anybody seen any Marvel movies here, right? Are you familiar with the term the multiverse? Well, people say that it's not just for a Marvel movie, right? It is a common theory right now. The idea is, well, that in one universe, there's not enough time, there's not enough anything for chance to make these things happen. But what if somewhere out there's a huge universe machine, like a copy machine, that's just cranking out universes, the multiverse, right? There's just universes it's cranking out. Well, maybe after a long enough time, it keeps cranking out universe after universe that's all just garbage and lifeless, but maybe finally it cranks out one that has all the parameters that we need here. And so that's the theory, that's something to try to not go the God route. Maybe there's something else. Well, there's a problem with both of those, and it's a significant problem. It's actually, to me, a showstopper. And that is in both of those, all they're doing is backing it up a step. Because all the same questions apply. Well, okay, so you're telling me that there's aliens, this complex life form that sent stuff here to start life. Well, what started that complex life form? Where did they come from? Right? Well, you're telling me there's this machine out there that's cranking out universes left and right. Well, that sounds pretty stinking complex. Where did that come from? Right? Where did that start? How did that just get in motion? And then you run back into the cosmological argument. Something doesn't come from nothing. Where do these things come from? Right? So there are theories that are put out there, but in the end, they don't have the explanative power because you run into the same wall. Where did it come from? Where do these complex things come from? And going back to the idea that's sort of the beginning, right? That we understand intelligence when we see it. We can't see summer in the sea, engraved in the sand. We can't see this alphabet serial letter and not understand this intelligence. It's just to look at these things, the fine-tuning of the universe. And we just touched on a couple. There is books. Let me just give you an example. By the way, these books over here are just mine. They're not to take, but I do have a list for books that are on a lot of these topics. If anyone's interested and wants to know more, this is a list to look at, and these were just for you to take a look at to see what some of them were. But the idea of our DNA and everything that how that proves that there's an intelligent designer, just that alone is what this book is about. So I mean, this is a way to say that you can go down rabbit trails of not small print either, right? These arguments are vast. They're complex. They're not just little lightweight arguments. Right? That prove is as much as, to me, like prove the existence of God. Right? I can't show you a picture. I can't take you back there. But we can look at all these things, kind of like that cumulative evidence, right? And so now we've got this teleological argument that just seems to demand that there is a God. Any questions on that one? Hopefully that's not because I just made your minds go no. So, bear with me. This is the hardest one of them all. Because this topic, just because we deal with these things that they're scientific, they're numbers. There's a lot of information, and it's hard to cover it. So the last bit, the moral argument. Last one we'll just touch on here. The moral argument gives that idea that we know good from evil. That we have an understanding, right, of what is good and what is evil. Right? That we understand that right, stealing, evil, murder, evil. Right? That we don't want to live in wherever this is, where you have to worry about somebody kicking you off in front of a bus. Right? I don't know where that sign came from, but I don't want to visit it. Right? We know, right, good from evil. So we see that stuff and we say that is evil, definitively. It's a thing that shouldn't be done. Right? How about the do's, right? Similarly, right? We understand that saving somebody from a fire, right? Running into a burning building, that idea of bravery, right? And you're going to go back thousands of years, right? You're a soldier on the battlefield, doing something sacrificial for your brother in arms, your fellow soldier, right? This bravery, it's always been a thing that is a good thing, it's a duty. We recognize it that way. The generosity, caring for others. Now these things can look different, in different societies, and certainly there are some cultures, right, where we see things that are not good, right? There's cultures, you go back in time, right? Cultures that practice human sacrifice and so on, things that we would say definitively evil. But I would say even in those, even though that the human sacrifice is evil, right? This not going to say murder is wrong. It's just that the human sacrifice thing is what must be done to placate their given gods, right? It's a thing, but in general, otherwise murder is wrong. Right? So there's still this throughout history, right? Throughout civilizations, you see some things like that where we call it heinous. There's still this general understanding of these rights and wrongs. And so the question is where does that come from? Where do we get it from? And what grounds it? What makes it right or wrong? There's three possible solutions. Right? One is that it is a reflection of our Creator. It is a reflection of the one who created us, right? Who is good, right? Who is morally pure. And has created us with these inclinations to know good and bad, right from wrong, right? Even though we like to try to mute them at times, right? If you ever think about how people always try to justify it when they do something they know they shouldn't, right? If they're stealing, I used to work there was a mission where there's a kind of like a Habitat for Humanity type of restore. It was that type of store. It was supporting a homeless shelter, rehabilitation shelter, and people would steal from there. And when you catch them, they'd always tell you, well, people donate this stuff anyways, and you're charging too much for it. Right? There's always a justification, right? Because they recognize, I understand what I'm doing is wrong, but then what I need to do is I need to justify it. And so even when people do wrong, often there's still this recognition of, I know it is, so I need to find a way to justify my wrong. So either that is a reflection of our Creator, or when someone says it's just how we evolved with this moral compass. If there's no God, right, we evolved, and that's kind of we evolved with this moral compass. The third option is what is commonly called the social contract, which is just the idea that very, very broadly speaking is that society kind of as a whole agrees. And I don't mean that they all got together in a room and made a vote. I mean, like just as a culture grows and expands, they kind of start to have these understandings, like we don't do this, we do this, right? It becomes just this societal norm, this societal understanding. It's a social contract, so to speak. Those are the three options, where these moral ideas, where the right and wrong ideas we have come from. When we talk about the idea that we evolved our moral compass, there's a couple of problems with that. One is just simply that people are talking evolution, they're talking about biological processes, right? How the cells morphed and evolved and adapted, right? But that doesn't remotely explain how a biological process, a purely biological process, would develop ethical and moral feelings and intuition. So there's a problem with that already. Then I think even a bigger one is, if it truly is, if it's then just all mechanical, it's just how it happened to come out. Well, then really there's absolutely no reason we need to obey it. Right? There's nothing that, if I just feel something is wrong, there's no reason, it's just mechanical, just part of how we evolve. One, I don't have any reason I must obey it. Two, I really don't have a reason to judge another society who might be doing something which I would call evil. I can't really judge it because it's just, maybe how they, I guess, evolved or work with it. And the similar thing is the idea with the social contract. Right, which this is a common argument.
You've done your job.
It's just where people have come together and decided it is not right to kill, it is good to help people. It's just we have, as a society, we come together and we know this.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Well, the problem occurs when you look at societies that we would call evil. Right? So when you look at Nazi Germany, again, to use that as an example, right? That was their society, right? They would have defended it. They would have said that actually this kind of falls an evolutionary thing, right? You get rid of the weak, the strong, the Uberman is what grows, right? The Superman. Well, if it's a social contract type thing, well then you have to say that that's just fine for them. Maybe I don't like it, but it's fine for them. How about for us in the States here? You have to say somebody like Martin Luther King Jr., who was at that time kind of speaking out against what society was doing, right? That he's in the wrong, you'd have to say, because the social contract was exactly what we have with segregation and some of those most horrible practices. So he was clearly in the wrong. He was bucking social contract. Right? We all know, like, you don't hear people claim this. You don't hear people say, well, Hitler was fine. I mean, I didn't care for it, but you know, it's their social contract. Right? Because we understand, like, there are things that are just evil. And so what you have in this moral argument is the idea of, to say, if there's no God, there's no ought. What do I mean? What I'm saying is, we talk like this all the time, right? You ought not do that. You shouldn't do that. Or you ought to. You should do this. And this is an everyday, our own speech, right? We talk about things you should and shouldn't do. And then we talk about kind of judging other places, other peoples, right? Things that they shouldn't be doing or they should be doing. I'd say without God, there is no ought. There is no you should. This is what I'm saying. Because every law needs a lawgiver. You need a lawgiver. So here, let me paint this picture. you're alone, you're on a deserted island, it's a huge deserted island. There's this road that stretches for a couple hundred miles, straight like this. You're there in your Lamborghini. Is there any reason that you can't drive 100, 150 miles an hour down that road? Right? No, none. You're there, you're on a deserted island, but in a straight road, there's nothing there, nothing. No reason you can't drive 150 miles, zipping in your Lamborghini down that road. Can you drive 150 miles an hour in your Lamborghini through a school zone with a 25-mile-an-hour sign?
Yeah.
Right, you can, but you're going to face the penalty, right? Yes. You're going to get caught. Yes, you're right. But then why? You're right. That's like, you can, but then what may happen, right? You might get caught. You're going to get arrested. Right? Why? Because there's
somebody.
There's what?
You can also might hit somebody.
Yes.
Kid.
Yep.
That's why it's bad.
That's why it's bad. Yeah, and that's what you have a lawgiver, right? There's the government that's saying you can't do this. Right? It takes somebody, a lawgiver to say that you can't. Which, by the way, is a side note. Maybe you've heard people say, like, you can't legislate morality. If you've ever heard that, let me clear that up for you. That is all what laws are. Laws legislate morality. That is what they do.
She has her glasses.
Right? So why is what you're getting on right here. Why can't you drive 25 or more, 100 miles an hour in this school zone? Well, it's because it's dangerous, right? You've got children running there. You've got adults picking up their kids, right? So it is a moral law saying that to drive through that at 100 miles an hour, you're putting children's life at risk, you're putting adults' life at risk. That is morally unacceptable. You can only drive 25 miles an hour. I mean, all laws are moral. Hunting laws, right? You can't go and hunt different animals. Some you can't hunt at all, some you can only hunt at certain times, right? The idea is, because if you were to hunt it all the time, you maybe send that animal into extinction. Right? That's a moral claim, right? That would be a bad thing. So we're not going to let you do it, right? All laws regulate morality. That's what laws do. But you need a lawgiver, right? So it is, in this case, with the speed limit, right? It's the government that's saying you can't do that. Back to that desert island, though, right? It's just you there, right? So there's no authority why you can't drive 150 miles an hour down that road. Well, let's just change it a little bit. What if one other person shows up on that island with their Lamborghini? Now can you drive 150 miles an hour?
We race.
That's right, that's right. But you might if you wants to, which if he's there in a Lamborghini, he probably wants to. But right, but at that point it's going to become a matter of debate. If they don't want to, if they don't think you should, well, now it's your opinion against theirs. They're saying there's two of us here on this island, we shouldn't drive over 50 miles an hour. And you're saying, there's still like two of us on this island, let's go 150. Right? It is a matter of opinion at that point. Of course, you could just increase that. You throw 200 people on that island, and now it becomes a lot more of whether we should or shouldn't. Right? It becomes a matter of opinion. Right? And that's what I'm saying is, without God, it's all a matter of opinion. And it just increases. When you have more people, it's just still more of a matter of opinion. And that's what you get. So without God, we couldn't judge history. We couldn't say that what Hitler did in Hitler's Germany was evil, because that was just really how they evolved. That was their social contract. It's what they wanted to do. Our opinion is it's bad, but I guess their opinion is it was good, right? We couldn't judge it. It's one opinion over another. Or we could judge it, but we have nothing to say ours is superior to their philosophy. And similar, we couldn't judge other societies for things. So as an example, right, Iran's been in the news a lot, and I don't mean the war at this point, I don't mean what's going on there. Just think about even a few months ago, before that started, when there was the protests, because the citizens there did not like the government, the brutality of the government. And then how many thousands of the protesters were murdered? Brutally murdered? Right? What's that? What if somebody said a number?
At least 40,000.
Yeah, huge amount, right? We'd say that is an immense evil. Right? That is an immense evil. Well, we only get to say that. I mean, if there's no God, right, then that's just a matter of an opinion. Our opinion is that that's evil. Clearly, for those in charge of Iran, they didn't think it was an evil because they did it. Right? But the reason that I think it's an evil is not because it's just my opinion. I think it's an evil because there is a God who has said that all people are created in his image, right? Who cares for all people. Right? So when I hear that kind of mass murder, right, I think it is the most heinous thing. Because there's a God, right, it's what grounds it. It's something that is outside of myself. It is beyond just my opinion. Right? It is grounded in something else. Without a God, it is all a matter of opinion. It's two people on the island arguing whether they should or shouldn't drive 150. Right? So God not only provides the answer why we have these general understandings of right and wrong, why it's in us, why we speak of things like you ought not do and you ought do. God gives a reason for why we have it, but he also grounds it on like why this thing. He is the lawgiver, right? Every law needs a lawgiver, or it's nothing. It's just an opinion, right? And God is that lawgiver. It grounds it. It's a truth outside of me. It's not just my opinion. So that is the moral argument in a nutshell, what it is. And similar then, so the last one I'll write in over here, the marker there, but the moral put in, right? It's another one pointing at God. And so when we talk about that cumulative case, it's kind of that idea. Right? There's all these different arguments that are going in, and the three big ones that we've just discussed. And all of them really have a nice answer in God. Why is these things? Well, if there's a God, if there is a creator, there's a reason we all have this idea of beauty. There's a reason we have these laws of physics, and that shows intelligence. There's a reason there's the design of the universe. There's a reason we all have this religious experience. There's a reason that we have these moral codes within us, that we're conscious people, that there's the laws of mathematics. But all of those are answered by God. Or you have to come up with other things, right? If I were to just go through all the other arguments, I'd have to point arrows towards other things. So some would say, maybe evolutionary, but again, there's problems with that. Some would say it's social contract. Some would say we come up with other reasons why we have these things, right? Or there's all one simple answer. So when you kind of look at that cumulative case, right? It all points to one thing, right? That there is a God. That God exists. And that was the point of tonight, right? That's where we're going tonight. Does God exist? And then, of course, the question then is, which God? Can we know him? And that's where we'll go the following weeks, right? That's what the following weeks are talking about. And we know there's a God who exists. Well, now who? Which God? And how do we know this God? So that we know there's a lot of competing theories out there. But I want to close with just one thing. If you've read the flyer, it says, how do we know there's a God who cares? Well, I kind of try to show all these arguments for how we know there's a God out there who exists, period, that there is a God. In the coming weeks, we'll talk a lot more on just how we know that this is a God who cares. I just want to say, even with the things we've discussed tonight, right? A God who doesn't care, right, doesn't give us the beautiful things that we are in awe of all the time. Right? He doesn't give us these moral codes in us of right and wrong, and not, murdering is wrong and harming people is wrong, right? He doesn't give us these things if he is not a God who cares deeply about his creation, who is relational. Right? So even with these, we already can see the picture that there is a God who cares. And that picture just begins to grow and grow more as we look into some of the other things we'll discuss in the following weeks. That is what I have for tonight. Hopefully I didn't just totally bog your minds down at all. I know it's a lot. Any other questions?
What's next week?
Next week is how do we know Jesus is who he said he is? How do we know the resurrection occurred? How do we know he really resurrected? All the historical evidence on it, all the things that look at him, at the historicity of Christ, at his resurrection. That's next week. Again, it puts more and more the picture of who this God is.
Yeah, but what's the food?
What's the food? The food is tacos. Awesome tacos, yes. So, a couple things really quick. There is a box right there with some note cards on it. If there is a question that you just didn't want to ask out loud, or you're just thinking of, you can scribble it on note cards and throw it in that box. And we'll, try to address in the coming weeks. And then there is a free will offering there. It is free of charge. We're not putting any pressure on anybody for any payment at all, but we just want to put it out there if anybody wants. Obviously, there's expense related to all this, so if anybody wants to, then that box is there. And the final thing really quick is we have these books here to be here for the following weeks as well. It is just it's a fairly short, easy read for those who don't just love to curl up with a good book all the time. And it's called What is the Gospel? So it is talking on what really is the gospel. And you might be even, you might have been a Christian for a lot of years, but can you even articulate what the gospel is? And maybe you're not, so maybe you don't really prefer the term. What is it? We just want to have these available for anybody who wanted to dive deeper into that. So, yes.
Papers.
Yes, we have so we have some of these to give away if someone is looking for one and would like one. Like I say, those books, those are just mine for people to take a look at if you wanted to see on some of these other topics. And there's a sheet there with a whole bunch of resources if you're looking for the books and dive into. Thank you so much, everybody.